Welcome to another show of the Market Access podcast. Today, we're going through another healthcare system, reimbursement system. This time, we're moving a bit outside of Europe, also outside of North America. We're moving towards New Zealand. And for that, I have an expert, I would say, with me. So looking forward really to all of the insights from New Zealand. Welcome, Julius Ohnberger. And whoever does not know you, Julius, just feel free to introduce yourself very briefly.
Thank you, Stefan. Or as we say, kia ora. I hope I can live up to the expectation. I'm a health economist. I'm trained in Manchester. That's where I did my PhD in health economics. I had a stint in academia for about 5, 6 years. Did a fellowship in London at Imperial College, and I focused on HIV and the productivity implications of investment in HIV. And then COVID came, and I was in the Department of Epidemiology led by Neil Ferguson, and we got really busy and distracted me from my fellowship. But I got an appetite for direct policy information using research. And then I changed to consulting. I worked for Ipsos UK. We did a lot of work for NHS England. A bigger piece was on supporting NHS England in evaluating their lung health checks program, which is now rolled out nationally. So I'm quite proud on that piece we did. And February last year, my wife and I, we moved to Aotearoa, New Zealand, up for an adventure. And I must say, my wife is a doctor, so that was also a driving force.
Mhm.
It's quite a strong tendency. She's British among UK doctors to leave the NHS and move abroad. And yeah, we haven't looked back since. Nice to meet you, and excited to talking to you today. For you, it's in the morning. For me, it's in the evening.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Which is already a big difference, right? And I think we might see some differences as well when we speak about the systems in general. But maybe starting really, let's say, quite from the start. I mean, maybe we just simply start with the healthcare system itself, and of course, leading that a
Mm,
bit into maybe the reimbursement. Could you just frame that a bit that we just see? I mean, how is it organized? Who are maybe the kind of key players? Of course,
yes.
always a bit thinking about, let's say, reimbursement and the stuff, but there are, of course, let's say, different angles to probably discuss as well about.
Uh, right. So I'd say there are three key organizations in New Zealand. That is the Ministry of Health. Ministry of Health, they're looking at monitoring of outcomes and policies. And you got Te Whatu Health NZ, and they are looking at the practical side of things. So they are running hospitals, and they're responsible for funding of primary care and community services. And then you got Pharmac. Pharmac, we're going to talk more about Pharmac because they're pretty crucial, and they're pretty unique because they're assessing technology applications, like NICE, for instance, does in England, but also they're the payer, like the NHS is in England. So they have a very special role. And if we're talking about healthcare or any kind of crown entities, because they're crown entities, New Zealand has a history, a colonial history.
Mhm.
We have to talk about Te Tiriti as well. Te Tiriti or Waitangi. That is a treaty. So New Zealand doesn't have a constitution like so many Commonwealth countries, but they have a founding document, and that's the Treaty of Waitangi. There was a document signed between the Māori leaders and the Crown, or also referred to as Pakeha, in 1840. And that was about coexistence, a peaceful coexistence, how the land could be shared, and co-governance. Now, this whole treaty thing is very complicated, contested to the present day, and it depends on which camp you are. There's different interpretations of it. I'm not getting into it, but if you ever get a chance, Waitangi is a beautiful place, and I went to the treaty grounds and I learned so much. It's in the Bay of Islands. I'm not advertising New Zealand here because everyone knows how beautiful New Zealand is, but the Bay of Islands is a gorgeous place to visit, and if you have a chance, go there and learn about the treaty. Why is the treaty important? It sets policies. There are certain treaty principles, and these treaty principles were or strengthened by the Healthy Futures Act in 2022, Labour government. I think everyone knows Jacinda Ardern. She was back then the PM. And there are three core principles that are really important, and they're shining through the healthcare system. And they're in particular also important for market access. And maybe that's a segue to market access. And there's equity. So organizations need to make sure that there are equitable health outcomes for Māori.
Mhm.
The second one is choice or options, which means that Māori can access culturally appropriate services. And that is also relevant for research for market access. And the third one is about partnership, meaning that Māori organizations, Māori voices are incorporated in governance and policy and decision making. Now, let's focus on Pharmac. What are the implications for market access? If you, for instance, submit your application, it's really important to keep the equity in mind. So you will need to show how your technology impacts Māori health outcomes, among other outcomes. You've got your standard cost utility assessment, but you need to make a point. How does it impact Māori health outcomes? And does it have any equity implications?
Mhm.
Also, before that, it's encouraged that you engage with Māori kaupapa, which maybe my pronunciation is not quite right. I've just been living in New Zealand for 2 years. But this is Maori specific research. And that is also relevant when you, for instance, run your trials. You need to engage with Maori experts. They help you engage with Maori, which you need to incorporate into your research. So that makes New Zealand quite unique, how it engages with its past
Mhm.
and how it reflects in its present form. Um, any further questions?
I mean, it is already, let's say, showing, I would guess, how somehow different the system is. I mean, on the other hand, I mean, it is maybe more the execution of equity, which is maybe a bit more advanced than in some of the other countries, right? I mean, we have spoken a lot about equity in a lot of different countries. I mean, in Canada, I would maybe say the idea is a bit more similar to first
Hmm.
generation Canadians, still not
Hmm.
executed that way, I would guess. Some of the things what I just heard, especially let's say that to include Maori in the, let's say, decision making, in the outcomes, that was very interesting. So that's maybe as well where I get a question in a second. But linked to that is also, I mean, if I mean, you said that outcomes for Maoris would need to be taken into considerations. Would that mean very similar to what I have heard and seen as well as some other Asian countries, especially, where they just say we want and need to have, let's say, at least, for example, a given number of my population in the clinical trial, or at least some analysis needs to be taken, or a follow-up study needs to
Hmm.
be under, let's say, under taken in that very specific population. Is that as well something similar to the New Zealand way, or is it still a bit different?
It depends. I mean, I'm working for a consultancy, and at the moment we're looking at the HTA for a cancer
Mhm.
intervention. And if you focus on using research, the sample size, for instance, that can be quite limited at times.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't necessarily be able, in that sense, to make a subpopulation assessment on survival, etc., because your sample is just too small. But it's rather reflected when it comes down to the epidemiology
Mhm.
and to supportive evidence, and that can come from clinical advice,
Mhm.
that can come from extrapolations. So I mentioned epi, thinking about, for instance, the prevalence and the incidence of the disease you're trying to target with your technology, provide figures on that one, for instance. How does it look like among Maori, but also Pacific people?
Mhm.
And then it's about the extrapolation to the wider health system. But you can draw on other inference there as well, which is coming from qualitative elements. And I guess that's also where it's pretty useful to engage then with specific malware groups, because that's quite appreciated. I acknowledge, yeah, in Canada, my one of my PhD advisors, he's quite involved in the sector there. And as much as I know they always acknowledge
Yeah, yeah.
the people of the place. They do this in Australia as well. But I believe that New Zealand is quite unique in the way that they're trying to live up to it, although it has been challenged over time. But there are certain elements in there that show progress, but there's still massive inequity in healthcare access
Mhm,
and in healthcare outcomes, and that's reflected in three areas. And one is ethnicity in New Zealand.
mhm,
So Maori have, on average, shorter life expectancy
mhm,
than all other population groups. Enrollment into primary care, for instance, is about, I think, believe 85% of Maori are enrolled, whereas I think all other, if you're looking about the ethnic profile of the populations, I think all of us are nearly at 100% enrollment. And so that reflects also an access issue. You've got lots of other chronic illnesses like obesity, diabetes, but also COPD that have a very high prevalence among Maori, but also Pacific people. So we need to do more. And it's just the other day when I was talking to a cancer advocacy group in New Zealand, and we looked into numbers. And when you look at, for instance, mortality, age-adjusted mortality outcomes in cancer and top cancers, pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, and you got melanoma, you got leukemia as well, etc., or breast cancer. We're not doing that well, as for instance, Australia does. And particular among the more deprived population, but also among Maori, this is a lot more, a lot worse, these outcomes. But kind of multiple reasons, and we can dig into this
mhm.
as our conversations goes on. But yeah, so well, there's a focus on equity. The focus is there also for reasons because we just need to do better.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you just said I think your background is and has as well been in the UK, so it was quite interesting that let's say in New Zealand also as an especially extrapolation is being accepted, where I would generally say let's say in Commonwealth countries, I think that's probably not so much of a discussion, at least from my kind of experience. In other
Mhm.
jurisdictions, that is sometimes a bit of an issue. That is why I was quite keen to hear. I mean, how let's say the system understands the outcomes and the outcomes discussions, but then it's
Yeah.
rather let's say there's the evidence and then you need to let's say put that into perspective, right? Kind of transferability, right, into the different kind of groups in New Zealand.
That's right. Yes, I mean it's challenging, and quite often what bigger pharma companies do, they have their global model, and
Yeah,
then they just need to find the New Zealand data to adapt the global model for their submission here. Preferably, they would do the research here. That would be amazing if they would do the research here because it's a good environment. Obviously, I'm talking with a bias because I live in New Zealand, but that would provide the direct data. Um, And that's actually also key for Pharmac to really ensure if you use external evidence that is applicable to the population. I mean, there are many ways around that. You can use the matching. If you have patient-level data, you can correct for that. Um, or just gather the right population evidence in New Zealand to support your assessment. Having said that, Pharmac will always do their own HTA. They take your HTA if it has progress through the stages, and probably good to talk to this as well about this as well. And then they conduct their own assessments, and then they will come back to you.
yeah,
Um,
I think it's a quite nice bridge because I just noticed as well down. I think the kind of system and the focus of it, I think that's I think quite clear. Now we need as well to move a bit into let's say the policy making in a way when we would be thinking
yeah.
about reimbursement itself. Where you just mentioned Pharmac, which is the HA organization, but at the same time, I think also the budget holder. So maybe a bit of a specific situation. I mean, just maybe elaborate a
Yes.
bit on that, like the process how it would look like, what are the drivers and everything, and would you see because I mean it's quite interesting as you have as well seen other systems, right? I mean, especially let's say you also your work in the UK. I mean, how does that maybe compare then as well?
Yeah, it's a unicorn, really, Pharmac.
Interesting.
I'm not aware that there an organization like Pharmac exists anywhere in the world, but it's probably easiest if we just imagine we have an application, right? So let's say we stay with cancer because that's quite topical. We have a cancer technology. So the first step is it goes to MedSafe.
Mm-hmm.
MedSafe will assess whether it's safe to use, as the name says.
Mm-hmm.
So you should have this evidence from your phase 1 trial usually. And then it's all good. The next step, it goes to a special advisory committee. So in the case for cancer technology, that's CTAC. That's the Cancer Treatment Special Committee, I believe. And I think that's what the name stands for. And they are going to look into the application and they're going to assess it. Let's say they give the green light, then it moves forward. And then Pharmac is going to look at the HTA elements, so the cost utility analysis. They look at what's provided, but they will conduct their own analysis as well. Plus, they will look at your budget impact analysis. Once this has been done, and this is, I believe, this is as far as probably NICE in the UK would go. NICE would then hand this over to NHS England, who is the payer, and say, all right, we have got our, there's a very clearly defined threshold in England. We know that as the cost per quality is the 20 to 30,000 pounds. Maybe it's changed now. So it makes it quite transparent and easy to follow. And they pass it on to NHS England, and the NHS England, or okay, they have to find a way to pay for that. It's different in New Zealand because it stays within Pharmac, and that's the unique part of it. Pharmac have a fixed budget. And that's a challenge as well. So let's say the technology is approved, and let's say they have enough money in their budget. Okay, then they can fund it. But it's more likely, well, there might not be enough money left. And so there's two options. The first option is, of course, the negotiation, because they're also negotiating with the industry. There's another option. They can negotiate with other industries who are funded, renegotiate, so that the prices are reduced so they can fit in the new technology into the existing budget. That's an option. Probably more likely what happens is it goes on a waiting list if there's not sufficient budget in the current fiscal year. And that waiting list, I think, is called the Preferred Options Investment Waiting List. It's quite long and can take time. So a pitfall of the system, I believe, is the time it takes. It can take years. And there is evidence, there are studies that looked at market access in certain countries, and New Zealand, I believe, ranked at the bottom compared to comparable OECD countries. And the reason is, well, New Zealand takes time to adapt new technologies. Part of this is this process, and it just has less technologies for this process. So that's a challenge. The upside, though, of the system is that it's a quite robust assessment process, and Pharmac is quite good in negotiating good price, which is good for me living here. Oh, let's call it the welfare. The downside, though, is, and we have done, the funny fact is, our MG, he set up Pharma in 1993, and a couple of years ago we reviewed Pharmac.
Wow.
So, and one of our findings was indeed that Pharmac lagged behind when it comes to more expensive treatments, which is of course a constraint by the budget. And these treatments are cancer treatments. These treatments are treatments for rare diseases and orphan drugs. And that's a challenge. And I think this is almost where we're coming full circle now, because I believe a couple of minutes ago I was talking about inequities, talking about inequities in outcomes, in particular in cancer. This is where one of the issues lies. The benefit, I said already, is it can give us a good price. So that trade-offs. The difference as well compared to NICE is that NICE is more transparent with the evidence they're producing, also more transparent with they also have the advisory meetings, and this is published, although quite heavily redacted, but it's still published. We don't see this here, so transparency is another issue. Sometimes Pharmac seems to be a bit like a black box, and we would love to understand it a bit better. I must say, though, as part of experience working with them. They're very open to talking and communicating early on in the process and to guide you through the process, to support you, to ensure that you're ticking the right boxes and the right information is provided. So it's quite proactive. So they're trying their best. And to be fair on it, Pharmac also are under quite a resource constraint. You can only assess as fast as many people you've got, and they're quite under the cosh. So yeah, it's got to have a holistic view on it. But yeah, there are pros and there are cons, and it's quite different to other systems where you have one unit is the payer and the assessor. It makes it easy to communicate, I believe, and once you've gone through this process, I believe it's probably easy to do. It's just can be a bit of a painful process.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like I mean the biggest challenge I guess is really the kind of the timing it is
Yes,
taken. I guess I mean how does it look like for, let's say, clinical evidence assessment? I mean, is that, let's say, according to evidence-based medicine, what we know from most of, let's say, the HTA kind of countries, looking for especially RCTs and high quality kind of trials, and then thereafter they're looking for cost effectiveness as well as budget impact. Is that a bit of the frame? Would we?
that's right. Yes.
So the similarities are there, but the execution is different, maybe especially driven by budget constraints.
It is, yes. I mean, the solemnity is pretty much in the terms of the assessment, like what NICE would do. But you've got the budget constraint, and that's two constraints, like that's the constraint on the resources of the pharmac, what they can do, and that's also the overall budget constraints of how much they can fund. Um, which, on the other hand, there are some potential upsides of that because they have to be very swift and very strong in negotiating because they understand, they totally understand the situation in which they're constrained, uh, that they need to do their best in negotiating the price down so that they can deliver the best outcomes. But we have seen a lot of pressure from government recently, and there's also been a bit of a shift in expectations as to how Pharmac are assessing HTAs. So there's now so because it's a crown entity, that means that the Minister of Health, who is Simon Brown at present, can issue a letter of expectation. And in his latest letter of expectation, I believe that was in July this year, he one of his predecessors also highlighted that the importance of considering the societal impact, in particular productivity of a technology. That's what they want to see considered in HDAs and in the assessment of Pharmac. What I hear from pharma companies now is that, oh, right, what shall we do? How shall we assess it? So I had quite a few conversations with them, how we could support them in integrating the productivity effects. Although there's a danger of doing this because it might have unintended impacts on equity. If you consider productivity, you also probably will end up maybe not funding so many drugs that focus on rare diseases, etc. So there's a downside, obviously. So that's an expectation. And plus, it will also imply that you will need more resources to look into this because you have just your HCA and then you need to look at the broader elements of it. And it's quite challenging, actually, if you look at the society impacts of it, because you can end up with very big values. And it's a lot more challenging to ascertain the quality of that compared to a HDA or cost utility analysis, where you have your data, you have your trial information you're using, you have your adaptation to the New Zealand system, either reflecting the population, which can be challenging at time due to lack of evidence. And that makes it quite clear. And there's pretty clear guidelines as to how to do it, ISPOS them all out. Yeah, there's a bit of a wind of change blowing, which reflects overall changes in the health care system over the last couple of years. It's in transition. It's exciting, but I also hear that there's a lot of advocacy groups that are very concerned, and it's rare disease. New Zealand, for instance, are concerned about it, but also cancer groups. If we're doing better in lung cancer, then that would improve outcomes. There has been a change, though. Part of the government's manifesto was to provide more money, more funding for Pharmac. They have delivered.
Hmm.
And they also specified that they wanted, I think it's around 30 cancer treatments
Hmm.
to be approved by Pharmac. I believe they're on the waiting list now. Now, that might sound like a good idea, but Pharmac is an independent body. So that undermines a bit the independence. And the other challenge is that it also undermines the negotiation power. Because if you're an industry, you
Yeah.
know that government wants it to be funded. Well, I'm in a good position because there's the pressure already. Um, that had a bit of an impact potentially on the price we're paying, but it moved forward. I think the focus on these drugs. I think what we need maybe to improve the situation is pretty complex. And I'm not sure if it would be better to switch to a nice system because, like I said, there are pros and cons. But I think when we think about reimbursement, it maybe help again to look over the ocean towards other countries. I mean, wherever you look across the ocean because we are in the middle of the Pacific. But outcome-focused reimbursement, so fast tracking technologies in high need where we have not as much evidence, but making reimbursement outcome related and permitting real-world evidence data collection
Hmm.
and post-market implementation studies to collect information. I believe that might help speeding up the process and providing still the negotiation power, but putting the risk on the industry, but also helping the industry at the same time to
Hmm.
get their application fast-tracked if there's need. And I believe then Kiwis will, not the birds, the population will benefit from it. So that might be an option forward. But there's many people having different ideas.
Yeah, yeah, no, no. I mean, it is complex, of course. Just a quick one because we're speaking about negotiation and all of the like. I mean, e- if I would be following, well, I had basically in mind we had a similar kind of situation many years ago in South Africa. Was rather budget impact issue for one of the, let's say, bigger cancer drugs, and ultimately the government wanted to have the product, and it was then finally agreed that only a subgroup of patients would get funded. I mean, ultimately, those kind of subgroup funding is also, I would generally say, a bit against equity. I think some
Mm,
countries like Germany, it's not even doable. I mean, you cannot only, let's say, reimburse for a given subgroup if the label, so the approval is broader. What is that? Is that as well a possible let's say, solution in New Zealand, or is it also, let's say, rather driven by equity, hence no subgrouping, only a solution? And then we are, of course, ending up in, as you just said, maybe the outcomes-based reimbursement, or, of course, discounts to the list price.
depends. I mean, South Africa is known for what they call positive discrimination that relates to the past. Um, I believe you would need evidence for that.
Yeah, yeah.
What comes to my mind immediately is distribution and cost effectiveness analysis, which I believe NICE are increasingly looking at. I don't think we use it here,
Hmm.
but it also means you need more data
Hmm.
to make this informed decision making.
Hmm.
And I alluded to earlier on that that's quite challenging to get when it comes to trial evidence. It can be challenging because usually it's just adapting global models to New Zealand population. And yeah, you may not have the depth of data to make this distribution assessment to identify a group. Um, it depends on what you want to do. I mean, you depends on what principle you want to operate as well. If you do it under Pareto optimal principles, if you can make one life better without making life worse, why not?
Yeah, exactly.
And that might be the case, but the question then is, you're taking funding away from other drugs or
Hmm.
technologies that might have implications for the broader population and not just for a subgroup. Um, yeah, I'm not much sure about that.
Yeah, no, no, no. You just while you were speaking, I mean, it was just coming
Yeah.
into mind because I still have that equity kind of thing basically really in mind. A
Yeah.
very similar kind of question maybe you mentioned before the societal impact, which is one thing, but if you of
Hmm.
course let's say stream that only down to let's say productivity, I mean this could also be of course let's say negatively impacted or impacting equity in a way, right? Especially when we maybe speak about oncology, right? Obesity is maybe one thing that's also
Hmm.
including, and let's say having let's say younger population, same with COPD or diabetes,
Hmm.
of course. I think just the ones where you just said, I mean, there is let's say an equity issue, especially with the Maori. But if we speak about cancer, and
Hmm.
only relating that to productivity, then it might get a bit tricky if you folks do not also include caregivers' productivities, right? Who maybe take care about those, let's say, ill cancer patients. Is that as well a discussion which has happened, or is that too theoretical, let's say?
No, no, it's happening. And Paula Longelli, she's a professor at Oregon University. She raised a couple of good points on this specific issue. She gave a couple of interviews and wrote a letter on that. And the wider community talks about this as well. There are people who are in favor of that approach, but I believe that it also depends, and like you say, on what type of treatment or in what situation you are and what type of illness you're advocating for.
Yeah.
Now, you put your finger on cancer, yes, spot on. We have an aging population, so with that, we have more cancers. And with that, if we just purely look at productivity, how do we value the productivity of an old population that's maybe also retired? That probably would be quite challenging to do, as opposed to a treatment for someone very young, early in life, that has quite a higher prevalence as well. So something like, well, you would have a trade-off between cancers as well. Yeah, we got to be careful with productivity. I think it's the idea behind that, I believe, is driven by the intention to account for the wider society impacts of funding. So a broader utility defocus. But yeah, it brings us caveats, and then there's the challenge of making it quite clear. How do you assess productivity? There's many different ways. It depends again on data you require, and if certain illnesses, lung cancer, for instance, although it's pretty prevalent, but you see it more in the high deprived populations. So, how do you evaluate productivity? Would you take a wage approach? Would you take the approach of the time people are off work? Would you, or do you take a fair approach of an average, a mean wage across populations? So, yeah, you would have a very clear concept of as to how to measure
Mm.
productivity. Carer, that's important to consider alongside. That's another point because there's a dual impact. I mean, it's their time, but also the opportunity, the opportunity cost of time, but also the benefit for the wider society because you won't need someone else to look after them if you have a family of Fano, we say to your member to support that. Yeah, it has been open debate though about that, and clear caveats. Um, and it would help to have maybe some clarity because it drives the investment decision in terms
Mm.
of evidence generation for any kind of company that wants to engage in the market. Yes.
Mm. That's yeah, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think a big discussion on that in general on that kind of approach. We are approaching basically the end of that conversation, which I really liked, a lot of new insights. But I think ultimately, I think key question is also why should a company really consider New Zealand? I heard a couple of its positives also around the system and everything, but of course as well a good number of caveats. I mean, you are now, let's say, living in that environment now since quite some time. So what is your kind of considerations? What are your kind of positives maybe as well? Why a company should consider New Zealand as a kind of launch country whenever that might happen for a given product.
Well, there's a clear need. So let's start with that. Uh, the aging population, we have a mix, quite a complex mix of chronic illnesses in the population. Complexities are increasing. We did just last year a big review of the funding for primary care. And as part of that, we improved the funding mechanism. And that was needs driven. So we spoke to GPs, we looked deep dive into the data, and you see that there's a deep need, it's a complexity of needs. And that's one point. People need the support. And they can help solving inequity issues. I alluded to this early on when we started talking. That's just one point. That's just like what they could give to us. Well, I say us. I'm just a Kiwi since February last year, but that would help. In particular, research, real world evidence to generate. If they come to New Zealand as well, not just with a submission, but also conduct their research here, that would be highly beneficial for them, for us as well. It would enable them to access the market easier, better also understand the market. There's a pretty good research environment here. There's some leading companies like the Malagan Institute. They focus on CAR T-cell therapy. They're top-notch in the league globally in that field. There's a pretty good clinical trial area here as well. We've got Fisher and Paykel, they're pretty much on medical devices as well. So there's a good environment. And I alluded to the cost control. Pharmac is pretty good on that. But in general, in the system, cost control is pretty good. So I guess you would have lower costs of running your research here. And before we started recording, I made a joke about the Kiwi dollar. For you to travel to New Zealand, it doesn't cost much these days because the Kiwi dollar, I think, is on a 5-year low. So if you come with a pound or US dollar or wherever you're based, you could purchasing dollar as well to invest. And lastly, it's a very nice bunch of people to work with. I really enjoy living here. It's a good approach, attitude towards work. I think that might hopefully convince people to come over, not just to submit, but also to engage early on with New Zealanders in market access and to provide the right technology and treatments to the population. Particularly, I think when it comes to preventative healthcare, that's really important. And when it comes to like the screening, etc., AI and these elements, it's all around there. But I think New Zealand might be a good test bed. We do have also certainly a higher prevalence of illnesses than others, respiratory illness I alluded to. So that might make a good test bed as well. And it's a pretty safe, good environment to do with good standards, quality of care and research. So I think that's my case for New Zealand. I mentioned some negatives. But if you are in New Zealand, I think the whole process will be easier and you have the right evidence.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's perfect. Very good. Thanks a lot, Julius, for all of your insights. I think that might help a lot of people, a lot of companies, hopefully then as well to navigate through the system and hopefully then also to make a positive decision for New Zealand. Thanks a lot for your time and your insights.
Hey, thanks, Stefan.